I should be able to paint a pretty good picture for you of how Montana approaches our pavement preservation. What I'm hoping to do with this is give you a broad overview of how our program works and the various components of it. I'm going to try to touch on how I think we're maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit unique from other states in what I've seen in attending the various WSDO conferences and other national conferences. I'm going to talk about the tools we use, and again, I'm going to hit on what we might do a little bit differently, why we think it works, and then I'm going to talk about what I think are our challenges, and then maybe some suggestions for the industry on some of the things we're actively working on. At the end, hit me with some questions. I might pass it off. We have a nice contingent of people from MDT here. Again, hopefully this will plant some questions in your mind, and as the conference goes on, feel free to ask anybody from MDT and see what their perspectives are on everything. Montana's highway system has roughly 20,000 centerline miles, a little over 40,000 lane miles. There's a breakdown of it. NHS is 4,000 of the centerline miles. One thing about it that we have is the other state and the off system. Most of those are paved, but there's a fair number of them that are gravel roads still. The state, the way we break things down is we have districts. We have a relatively large headquarters where our engineering and maintenance is headquartered, but we also have everything's driven in the districts. So we have engineering and maintenance staff in the districts, and they're the main points on making a lot of these decisions. So for pavement preservation, I think things starts with our pavement management system. They gather the data, they assess the system conditions, and then they have the treatment recommendations. Those are based on ride, rut, and cracking indices. We have indices. I'm not sure how everybody else does it. They're not just straight ride numbers, but we correlate them all to indices that I think are probably unique to Montana. Is that fair to say? Then our planning staff uses the pavement management numbers to come up with our funding distributions. That's through a process called the performance programming process. The acronym's P3. Then one of the key components, once they set that funding distribution, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, once they set that funding distribution and put that money out there, it's the districts that go and nominate projects and develop those projects and decide how to do this, decide where to put the money. When I say preservation is institutionalized, I don't know if that was the best word to use, but it was all I could come up with. There's a lot of things we do, and the best example I can think of is chip sealing. We chip seal immediately after paving. And I've had numerous people question why we do that from other states, even internally they question why we do that. But it is just done automatically. It's not something that we have project-specific discussions on. It's what we do as a department. It's kind of the opposite of what it's questioned. If somebody doesn't want to do it, then there's a lot of effort that needs to be made to go the other direction. And so that preservation is something that we do, and it's just ingrained in a lot of people. If you went and asked probably a lot of our district staff, they may not even realize that we're fairly unique, or I believe we are. We used to be unique. I think other people might be starting to do it, but they wouldn't even question it as much as other people would. So then the question is preservation working? So back in 2002, we hired a consultant, Fugro BRE Incorporated, I think was their full name. This is prior to me being materials engineer. But they went out, and we were pushing hard to go to ME design at that time. And so we went out and we wanted them to calibrate the process. And so Fugro went and looked at LTPP sites plus 10 other Montana sites. And they wrote a big report, and there was a lot of findings out of it, but this was one of the best quotes out of the whole thing. And they attributed that initial chip seal to giving us 5+ years of additional service life. A little further on, they talked about the excellent performance of our pavements, and they mentioned the aggressive chip sealing, and the other thing they mentioned was we have a 93% compaction spec, and that is fairly high. And those were the two things they were attributing the longevity of our pavements to. Another thing that tells us that what we're doing is probably working pretty good is 2013 Reason Foundation reports. And I really don't know the background on the Reason Foundation. I just saw that they're a national group, seemed to be independent. Well, they ranked Montana 5th in the nation. Most improvement from 1989 to 2008 for overall performance and spending efficiency. And to me, that's kind of the thing that gets lost a lot of times, is that spending efficiency component. If you have all the money in the world, I would hope you can get things caught up and have a good system. But to combine overall performance and spending efficiency, that told me we were probably doing something right. The top 5, you can read them there. So then going back to our process. So it all starts in planning. You got to figure out where you're going to put your money. So planning's when they figure out their process, we call the performance programming process. And what they do is they use our pavement management system to optimize the distribution of funds, to project how to get the best performance with the money that we have. They also factor in the money we have to put to safety, what we have to put to bridge, and put everything together to get optimized performance for everything combined. And so that's what their process is. One of the things they do in that process is they put in pavement preservation plugs, and that's what we call them. The P3 process identifies a 5-year plan. We don't want to identify projects for pavement preservation any further than 2 years out, and so we just put in plugs. And so it's just the dollar amount with no jobs assigned to them. Everything else about our planning process includes the specific projects they're assigning the jobs to. So the plugs are somewhat unique. This is an example of the report that Mary Gale's group prepares every year, and it breaks down all the roadways on our system by segments, and provides and it kicks out the recommendations from do nothing, crack sealing, to major rehabilitations. Pavement management triggers for cracking. If the indices are mid-fair to mid-good categories, it'll kick out a crack seal for less than 6 years of age. If it's 6 to 12 years, then it's suggesting chip seals. Rut and ride. Overlays are almost always triggered by ride, and that triggers 112 inches per mile, which is converted from our indices. And then rut treatments, which are typically mill fills, overlays, or microsurfacing, start at 0.3 inches of rut. So the pavement management system's all driven by our data collection vehicles. Here's one with as scenic of a view as you can get in the background. That's the Beartooth Mountains. So we have 2 of these vehicles. They drive all the roads in the state every year. We purchased them for roughly $500,000 each in 2011. And with the 2, we can cover everything statewide. Part of the reason part of the way we justified being able to pay for them and purchase them was they also integrated our video image viewers, which was a completely separate program prior to this purchase. We also have skid testing we do, but that's not included in the pavement management system. It's just something we do, checking problem areas and just checking how we're doing. When you buy a $500,000 vehicle, one of the things you worry about is wrecking it. And so they had this image, which was kind of disturbing. That was really disturbing. But luckily they didn't have the third picture, which showed it was a good ending. But it is a concern. It's $500,000 vehicle. Our drivers have done an excellent job. We haven't had any issues with hitting deer. Part of that's they're doing a good job. The story they told me with that one was he saw the deer coming. He was only going about 10, 15 miles an hour when it crossed. And fortunately, and they also time everything to avoid the high traffic areas. So when it comes down to doing the actual work, our construction program averages out to $334 million a year. The plant mix surfacing is what we call hot mix, $87 million on average. Thing to know about that is calendar year payments. That was the easiest way for me to capture it, and so you can see some fluctuation in there. Montana is primarily, it's all hot mix. We do very little concrete paving. Might put them in intersections, roundabouts, and if we get a chance and the traffic and volumes dictate, we try to get them out there, but it just hasn't been cost effective yet. So we're spending roughly, and the other thing, I guess, going back to that, we spend roughly a quarter, a little more than a quarter is what that's showing for the hot mix items. That's not including the associated costs. The traffic control is a separate item. There's a variety of other things. So a little more, it's more than a quarter's going to our paving. Maintenance program has a much more limited budget, and as Director Tooley touched on, it's a problem area. We're running short on state funds. Each district gets $1 million, and then they also have $7 million for a statewide program. And I believe that's about the bare minimum for our maintenance effort in order to get our federal funding. The niche it holds is it's our only mechanism for doing reactive maintenance. Our maintenance guys still manage to have an aggressive crack sealing program, and they get out on those as money allows and as needed. And they're working in the districts. They're coordinating with our construction program to ensure that. So if construction's doing a job, maintenance will focus their efforts elsewhere, and that's all happening district-wide. That's not happening in the headquarters. And they're also providing the critical input when determining what the treatments should be and what the priorities should be. All right, so with our crack sealing, they contract out a lot of this work, and so a lot of times you'll see our crews out there on the road, or you'll see crews out there, and they'll do fairly long jobs. And yes, that's the toilet paper blotting. You get a lot of questions on that. Crack sealing is something that when I was working out in the construction in the field, you hardly saw any crack sealing projects. And where we're at now is it's a constant thing, and it's getting as ingrained as the chip seal program in my view, but it's not quite there yet. We had one district that held out for a lot of years. We finally got that turned over, and so I think we're doing a very good job of getting on the crack sealing. They coordinate when they need to crack seal with the chip sealing and get out there as soon as they need to. So it's really helping reduce the water intrusion. And it appears to be helping with eliminate the real severe cracking that we'd see where the cracks are separating over an inch. So.
Are those state forces or are they contract?
It's more than likely it's contracted. I'm not sure which pictures he gave me, but most of the time they're contracting, but our state forces will do it too. They'll do some chip sealing too, but for the most part, the work's contracted out. Chip sealing. Now, that's kind of their bread and butter. You drive any of the roads in Montana, this is hopefully what they're going to look like. We chip seal under the same contract as the paving. So it'll be chipped the year it's paved, or it'll be chipped the following year if the paving's done after August. We expect 6 to 8 years service life out of it, and contractors are required to warranty the work through the first Wednesday in December of the year it is placed. And so there's a reason for the first Wednesday in December. It sounds kind of weird, but in the last day you're going to get a presentation on how that chip seal warranty came about and then how it was developed. And the guy doing it, I think you're going to really enjoy his presentation. He's the one that actually developed the warranty spec 15 years ago, and he's kind of been just shepherding it along ever since. So if you get a chance and you have questions about that warranty, corner him. His name's Bill Fogarty, and he can answer any questions you might have. Because I know when I was at Washita last year, that was one of the topics that there's at least several western states that are kind of looking into that. And he's a very good resource to talk to about it. We started chipping all our pavements somewhere around 1990. I couldn't exactly get an exact date. I always was under the impression that the reason we were doing it was to seal the pavements. To me, that's why we've done it. I asked the only guy that was around that actually knew the reason. He straightened me out. He said that when they originally started doing it, it was actually for the skid. And so that's why I'm talking about our mixes in this slide. Back in 1990, we were using what we called a grade B mix. It on average had roughly 6% oil in it. We had a lot of issues with rutting, which I think was fairly typical of the industry back then. And that was, so they started chipping purely for the friction benefit of it. Around 1994, we went rather quickly to grade D mixes because of the rutting issues. And our grade D mixes, actually a lot of those will meet super pave specs. They didn't have the rutting issues, but they're very porous. And we continued chipping through then. And then super pave, we were fully implemented somewhere around 2003. We started going to it in the late 2000s. And again, those mixes are even more porous probably than our grade Ds. And so which is what led me to believe that was why we were chip sealing, is to keep that water out, because we knew that it was very beneficial to keep it out of there. So the benefits of chipping right afterwards, and again, I'm hitting on this because this seems to be one of the areas that maybe we're a little bit unique. Benefits I see from it is it seals the pavements, increases the friction, it protects pavements from oxidation and any other atmospheric effects. And then something you don't hear about is it does reduce the water spray. It's definitely not an open grade friction course, but it is reducing the water spray. The issues that you run into it is the windshield damage and then premature failures, which if it's bleeding or just the chips coming off, both of those are not well received by the public. The other issue that we're seeing right now, and deservedly so, and what the reason a lot of states don't do it is benefit cost. And so the question is coming up, why do we do it? If we need to watch our money, why are we chip sealing immediately? Can we get away with doing it 5-6 years later? So people are asking that question. I think it's a good question. It's something we haven't ever quantified other than the two reports I cited earlier, and we probably need to get to doing that because it's a legitimate question, and it basically doesn't look like funding's going to get any better for us, at least. Another tool we use is the overlay. Our standard mix is another reason, and so I keep talking about how porous our pavements are. One of the things we do that I'm not sure that anybody else does is we use primarily 3/4 inch mixes, put them down at 1500ths to 2/10ths. Most other states that I've seen or heard about use a wearing course or a surfacing course that'll be either a 3/8, a number 4, or top end a 1/2 inch. Those are much less porous than our 3/4 inch mixes. So we apply the chip seals under the same contract, but recently, probably within the last 5 years, we're seeing issues with the premature wear on our chip seals, and it's primarily in urban areas. We attribute it mostly, I think it's to studded tire wear, but we're just not getting the service life out of our chip seals in those areas. And so then you really do have to ask a question if you're getting a benefit cost out of it, if the cost justifies the benefits, or the benefits justify the cost. So in those areas, we've started using some 3/8 inch mixes and without chip sealing them. We've started using microsurfacing, and it's primarily just to get those jobs where we're seeing rutting. We don't feel like it justifies an overlay or a mill fill, but we need to do something a little more than a chip seal. The microsurfacing seems to fill that niche real nicely. We haven't done a lot of them. We did 2 in 2011. We've done a couple every year since. It appears to be a cost-effective solution for minor rutting. We haven't had any real issues with it, and we're going to continue doing them. The one thing that we're seeing is the last 2 years we've had to sit down and talk internally with our district staff, and it seems to be primarily due to unrealistic expectations. And this picture comes from the job that really created an uproar, or created a lot of questions last year. And what it was is people perceived it as new pavement. So they're expecting to fix this road, which wasn't in terrible shape, but it didn't have a great ride. And they thought it would fix that ride because they thought we were paving it. So the perception was it was one of the worst paving jobs they'd ever seen, when in fact it wasn't intended to fix that ride. So that I think that we were hearing that from both internal and from the public. Public's a little harder to get that question fixed, but internally we really we still need to do some education on that to eliminate that issue. Cold in place recycling we've been doing since I think our first job was back in the late 80s. We did a few in the early 90s, kind of got away from it, and got back into it in the early 2000s. We've had pretty good luck with it. We've done both just with just a chip seal over the cold in place. We've also overlaid them. Whenever we've overlaid them, we've had nothing but good luck. We've gotten the service life out of it. We haven't had any issues. The chip sealing, the surface, it's a little more hit and miss. We've had a little bit of raveling on the meat lines at times, and there have been issues with with the timing on those jobs, being able to get it in and chip sealed before the weather window gets through. So the benefits we're seeing with the cold in place: reduced cost, reuse of existing material, minimize the loading of the reduced pavement section. What I was trying to say there is, if you mill and fill, you have the paving operation, the hot mix trucks running over it. Even if it's for a short time, they can blow the existing mix up if there's too little left after the milling. With the cold in place, they're picking it up and they're putting it back down, and that train's fairly heavy, but that's the only loading that's getting it. So that's a benefit in certain instances on certain jobs. And then the other benefit is, if you're just chip sealing it, it doesn't have any effect on the pavement width. The issues that we're seeing with it is no local contractors has really limited the cost savings. The last time we looked at it, with a fair number of jobs, we were only getting, I think, 85% savings. It was 85% on the dollar versus an overlay, and it has very limited ride improvement if you don't overlay it, if you just chip seal over it. So it's really not the same. And then the weather limitations is another issue. You got to have that surface covered prior to winter, and there are some temperature limitations. So between the two of them, in some of the areas we'd use it, the high mountain passes, you have a very narrow weather window to get one of those down. Going back to the limited cost savings, we got some new people in our surfacing, and they took a look at that, what we were speccing. This year we allowed cement, where in the past we'd only allowed, I think it was lime. I can't remember if it was quicklime or hydrated. But by allowing the cement, we seemed to increase the competition, and we got a substantially better price than we had been seeing. So hopefully that one change alone makes a difference. Some other tools that we've at least looked at are slurry seals. I'm only aware of one job having used that. Hot in place recycling. We did, I think, 3 jobs back in the early 90s with hot in place. After those 3 jobs, it was determined that we could just pick it up, haul it back to the plant, and recycle it at a portable plant for the same cost, so we went away from it. The last few years, we've been looking at doing hot in place recycling again. It seems to have a place. We just really haven't been able to figure out how to make it work, but we're continuing to look at it. And towards the end, I'll talk a little more on the hot in place, because there's some issues there that are a little bit frustrating. Scrub seals, I'd say we're very fortunate I think scrub seals have a definite place, and they'd be a excellent tool to use for certain conditions, and we just don't seem to have those conditions, and those conditions are very cracked surfaces, and we haven't seen the ones that seem like good candidates, but it's definitely something that's on the radar. And cold central plant recycling, out of all these, is the one I really think there's a lot of potential here in the state for doing that. We haven't got one out on the road yet, but I anticipate that the next time we do a cold in place, we identify a cold in place job, a cold central plant's going to be an option. And that's, from my understanding, there's basically all they need is a pug mill, and we got a lot of contractors that have pug mills, and we got at least one that's very interested in giving it a try. One of the problems we've identified with our cold in place program is it just seems like there's never been real good competition, and that's why we haven't seen the cost savings that other states have seen and that you see in the literature. So we think that cold central plant will introduce that. Challenges. So with anything, it's funding. That's really what the biggest thing I see. The highway bill, the director talked about it. I couldn't say it any better. That's the number one thing. The other thing is other needs, and I called it capital improvement. I think Director Tooley called it capacity expansion. But basically the reconstructions, those jobs are, that's what people see. That seems to make more of a difference in people's lives. They're going to push for that. The public will. That's where our administrators are going to get the pressure to put the money, is those capital improvements. So that's always a risk. Safety, might be kind of a surprise that I'd list that, but right now we're statewide, that's pretty much our number one thing. Director Tooley listed pavement preservation and safety. When those two compete, it's really hard for you to prioritize pavement preservation over safety. It's something that you're not going to win that argument very often. And what's front and center right now is, for us, is centerline rumble strips. We're moving forward very aggressively with centerline rumble strips. I'd anticipate within 5 years you're going to see them just from one end of the state to the other. It's purely safety driven, and it's going to reduce. It's going to lead to some, or I believe it's going to lead to some reduced service life on our roads. We don't have any information saying that, but it just makes sense that it could be. So that's what I mean by safety. And again, I don't know that I disagree that it shouldn't be a priority. It's just a reality that we're probably going to lose some life. And bicyclists is another one that might surprise you, but we get more pushback on our chip sealing due to the bicyclists than anything else. And it's just, it's a threat. It really is. They'd prefer we didn't chip seal at all. Now we actually chip seal full width on our roadways. Oftentimes it'll come up, why do you chip the shoulders? We think we get increased life off getting those shoulders sealed too. That's where the bicyclists want, so now there's that added pressure to not chip the shoulders from them too. So I listed them as a challenge. The other big challenges we see fall into the staffing area, and I know that's consistent through all agencies. So just good succession planning. We've been fortunate that we've been able to do that. It's been a challenge at times, but that's why you're seeing our chip sealing program's institutionalized. We pass that on. That's just what we do. So I say that on one hand, that we're passing down this knowledge. The other thing I see as a challenge is not getting complacent. So one thing I don't think you want to do is fall in a rut. So I think it's a good thing that we have people questioning the need to chip seal immediately, the need to do things, and why have we always done it this way? I think that's a good question to ask, and if you don't have a good answer, we should try something different. And then training and education, seems like when you run into budget issues, that's one of the first things that comes on the chopping blocks. And so those are the challenges I see. Industry suggestions, standardized technologies, and here's where I'll get into the hot in place thing. I don't know if we have any hot in place reps here, but they're the best example I can think of. And we've had 3 different technologies presented to us, and it doesn't appear you can spec. You have to pick one. You can't spec them all, and that's quite frustrating to try to figure out which one's best. Do you have to have a different spec for every situation, and then what kind of competition are you going to get? It's a challenge, and it just makes it, from a specifier point of view, I'm less likely to spec it at that point, because are you going to see any cost savings? What are you going to see for quality if they're the only game in town? So There's one, and again, these ones are pretty much from what my personal experience, what I'm seeing. Continuing education on the proper use of each technology. One of the dangers with any of these is if you use a treatment in the wrong application, set it up to fail. And that kind of ties into the bottom bullet there, ensure the quality of the product being delivered. So I think the second bullet falls on the specifying agency, pick the right job. And I think the last bullet falls on the industry. I think in this kind of setting, everybody wants to deliver quality, but when it comes right down to it, when you're out on the job, it's been raining for 2 weeks, you need to get out of there, and so maybe quality is going to slip a little bit, or your desire to give that quality product's getting outweighed by financial. And I understand that. I'm just saying that in a lot of these things, and in our case for microsurfacing being the one right now, we're just getting our feet wet. We're just getting our initial experiences with it, and a bad experience is going to go a long ways for whether we continue with it. So that's what I'm trying to say with it, with all that. And then going back to the third bullet, quantify the benefits. So I'll use our chip sealing initially as an example. It's something we've been doing forever. It seems to work. We have some information that's saying it's working, that we're getting a quantifiable benefit out of it, but it's probably not enough. As if we run into any real funding issues and funding constraints, we don't have enough data to say that, you know what, we got to cut somewhere. This isn't the place to cut, and I think we need to quantify those benefits better. So, any questions?
Well, great, thanks, Matt.
Okay.
That's very informative.